Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today on simplifying MFA compliance with FIDO2 security keys. My name is Michael Epping. I am from Microsoft on our identity customer experience team. And I'm also here with David and John from Yubico and Versasec. So let's dive into the session. We do intend to have some Q&A and back and forth. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A in the Teams live event. And then we will try to make sure to either get to those up front or as we go through the session. So I'm going to kick us off here and talk about the evolving MFA landscape and really talk about Microsoft's perspective on kind of where we are as an industry and where many of our customers are and where we're trying to drive our customers to go. So if we take a step back from just thinking about MFA, and passwordless and all of these kind of buzzwords that everybody is kind of interested in these days. We have some data from analysts like Kuppinger Cole around what are customers really thinking about when they are trying to improve their authentication experiences or deploy new capabilities around passwordless and authentication. For me and for a lot of my colleagues, we come from a security practitioner background and we work a lot with security teams at our customers. But implementing something like passwordless and strong authentication is not just about improving security. Obviously, that is an incredibly important thing to do, but organizations are looking at it as part of a more holistic project to try to achieve additional goals around things like cost reduction. Because traditionally with passwords, there can be a large cost associated with doing things like help desk resets of users' passwords or investing in deploying self-service password reset tools. Obviously, getting compromised by using weak passwords or bad passwords or just passwords without MFA also comes with a cost. A lot of the customers I talk to these days are also interested in things like regulatory compliance. So for example, NYDFS is a regulation in New York State for certain industries that's very impactful and has a lot of requirements around making sure that you're deploying MFA for particular scenarios. And then of course, we also want to think about the general end user experience, which does kind of go hand in hand with doing things like reducing costs and making sure that our user base is happy and not trying to work around our security mechanisms that we're trying to put in place because they're so miserable to use. So we really want to think about trying to improve across all of these different metrics and think about when we're doing a deployment, how can we try to achieve these various goals beyond just the improved security? Of course, security is super important though, so we are going to focus a lot on that, especially because that's usually the thing that we'll talk with security teams and identity teams about as kind of the foremost thought in their minds. Because what we're seeing in the industry is that a lot of compromise, a lot of successful attacks on our customers are starting with identity attacks. So something like 99% of identity attacks generally come through one of three different forms: breach replay, password spray, and phishing. However, what we're seeing is a trend towards phishing being the way that successful breaches are happening. So we want to make sure that we are starting to think about not just multi-factor authentication, which as an industry, we've kind of been pushing customers to deploy for 5, 10, 15 years at this point. But we really need to start thinking about leveling up to phishing-resistant authentication, because this is where the attackers are moving to. They're beginning to breach our customers even when those customers have MFA deployed, because phishing is becoming so effective and so commoditized and easy to use for them. So if we think about what the ecosystem out there looks like, we actually have a lot of data that comes from a report that Microsoft published last fall called the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, which you can go grab at aka.ms/MDDR. And what we saw is Microsoft's ecosystem suffers about 7,000 password attacks per second. So that's kind of this bottom level of the pyramid. So by volume, we have tons and tons and tons of attacks, and most of these by volume are password spray. And to be clear, any form of MFA can help to greatly reduce the risk of suffering a breach due to one of these very common password spray or password attacks, including password spray. But where we're very concerned and we are pushing really hard to start getting customers to move to is starting to protect themselves at this middle tier of the pyramid, where attackers are being successful at attacking organizations that have deployed MFA. Excuse me. traditional forms of MFA, like SMS, push notifications in applications, phone calls, OTP codes. Attackers are getting very good at doing things like adversary in the middle attacks, where they get a user to click on a malicious link. It takes them to a web page that looks like a real login page, and then they cough up their username, their password, the SMS OTP code they received, and now the attacker is in as that user, even though MFA was deployed. So we really need to think about how are we going to start to counter this middle section of the pyramid, because this is where many of these successful breaches and the types of breaches that we're seeing in the news are starting to come from. So by volume, these are not as many as what we see at the bottom level of the pyramid, but in terms of successful breaches and really damaging breaches, this is starting to become a really important section. And then, of course, attackers will move on to other things. That's what the top section of the pyramid represents. They'll move on to session attacks, attacks on infrastructure, attacks on things like OAuth consents. So we don't need to, we can't stop once we deploy phishing-resistant MFA. We'll need to move on to making sure that we're protecting a customer from these other types of attacks. But for now, most customers are not protected at this middle section of the pyramid. They are not using phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication 100% across the board. And so this is going to be a big focus for Microsoft and our customers and our partners for the foreseeable future. So where are we trying to get to? We are trying to remove the attack vector of standalone passwords, of course. So standalone passwords are going to leave you vulnerable to all those types of attacks we just talked about. But really, we want to move beyond that and start to think about better user experiences. So, if you're using traditional MFA like username plus password plus SMS codes or push notifications, that can be kind of slow and arduous, and end users may not like those end user experiences. So we really want to start to think about moving towards better end user experiences than traditional MFA, and then all those stronger forms of authentication. So device-backed authentication methods, which might look like Windows Hello for Business, it might look like passkeys, or what we're going to focus on a lot in this session is physical FIDO2 security keys like a YubiKey. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to talk about centralized management of FIDO2 security keys using Entra ID, Yubico, and Versasec.
Thank you, Michael. My name is David Maples with Yubico. Next slide, if you would, please. So as Michael mentioned, MFA mandates are being driven by a number of things, everything from the user experience to operational security to regulatory compliance and ultimately operational efficiency, which translates into cost reduction. But in the end, all of these are under the umbrella of protecting yourself against cyber threats, protecting your organization against those malicious entities who wish to compromise your security and gain access to your data. Next slide, if you would, please. As Michael's already shared, this is not a thing that is coming. This is here today. This is here today, and it has already driven mandates by the biggest tech entities out in the world today to enforce multi-factor authentication and much more phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication to all of their employees and subcontractors. This is an attack that is draining funds, that is impacting business, and needs to be addressed because it is not going to go away. And as Michael mentioned, it's only going to be getting worse. Next slide, if you would, please. But this isn't just in the tech industry. Everybody is familiar with a debit card, and you already know that there is a form of multi-factor authentication with that, in that you have to enter your PIN and provide the physical card in order to withdraw money from most locations or utilize it in a physical location. This is the first wave, and the restrictions are getting more and more stringent as attacks against these are incredibly lucrative if they're able to be pulled off correctly. As such, the financial industry is joining the push to move to stronger forms of authentication. But again, this is at the consumer level. They're not the only ones. Next slide, if you would. The EU is pushing new directives to enforce network and information security. That is to say, enforce multi-factor authentication, enforce phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, and secure the entire user lifecycle from onboarding and issuance to offboarding and retirement of accounts. This is because, as mentioned before, phishing and other forms of identity-based attacks are on the rise and are the preferred tool of not just hostile nation states, but independent entities looking to gain access to critical or otherwise secure data. The entire world is shifting to favor strong multi-factor authentication because this is the attacks that are being cared for. But the good news is we are in place and we have solutions that meet or exceed all of these requirements. Next slide, if you would, please. So as I'm from Yubico, I'm going to start with my base, the actual physical hardware for your authenticator. The YubiKey is a hardware-based authenticator that is purpose-built for security. Secrets and credentials stored on the device cannot be exported. It also is Yubico is the leader for implementing strong phishing-resistant multi-factor, including FIDO2, quickly known as passkeys, as well as the PIV smart card. With all of these abilities on the same device, you're able to use it at any place that you can either tap it against an NFC reader, such as your mobile device, or plug it into a USB port, such as your laptop or PC. With this, authentication is simple as plugging it in, typing in your your PIN to verify that you are who you say you are, tapping it to prove that you're an actual person by having a physical gesture, and you're logged in. The entire experience reduces the complexity of even the best password managers to something that is quick, simple, easy, without compromising security. Next slide, if you would, please. But the authenticator is just one part of a true enterprise solution for phishing-resistant multi-factor. To really achieve strong and usable environments, you need to have an entire ecosystem, and this is why you see Microsoft, Versasec, and Yubico working together to meet these needs and your requirements. Together, we can provide a solution that not just supports the user lifecycle from onboarding to end, but also provides a great user experience, getting their credentials and hardware to individuals, performing strong authentication in an easy and frictionless manner, while not compromising security and ensuring that you're complying with regulations and managing it from the smallest enterprises to the largest, but doing so at a cost that does not impact your bottom line. Next slide, if you would, please. We're going to go through each one of these individually. Let's start with the credential lifecycle. As everyone knows, before you can get anybody onto a system, you need to first establish that they are who they say they are. Traditionally, this is by giving out a username and PIN or password. It can be anything I've seen from sending a letter with a long, complex temporary password that they need to change, to telling them that their password is their first name, the last 2 digits of their birth year, and hoping that nobody catches that in transit. Obviously, this is a point of failure for a lot of organizations, especially large ones, who are using simplified deployment strategies without thinking of the out covering every endpoint. Thankfully, with Microsoft, Versasec, and Yubico, onboarding becomes much, much easier. In a support for passkeys, phishing-resistant passkeys, Microsoft has allowed users to log in with a passkey on a device such as a YubiKey. Versasec, which we will see later, has simplified the process of loading these passkeys onto your YubiKey and getting the YubiKey into the user's hands. It can either be done with direct issuance from an internal help desk or IT staff, or they can ship a blank YubiKey and then load their passkeys on it at a remote solution via self-service. What's more, Versasec can then manage those passkeys into the Microsoft Entra ecosystem, so removing the need for the user to register in more than one location. This is a very, very strong solution in that users don't have to do anything, but are permitted to support multi-factor authentication from day one, not just multi-factor authentication, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. So in the pyramid that Michael showed previously, it secures up to the first 2 levels without the user having to jump through any hoops. Because of this automated device registration and management, account recovery also becomes quite simple. Either we've seen everything from issuing multiple authenticators to the user at the day 1, so they have a backup, to issuing them a just-in-time authenticator, either running it up from the IT desk, issuing it from another user to a blank device that they had on hand, or otherwise shipping or overnighting a authenticator to the accounts that have the highest risk. But end-to-end, there's no fallback to a less secure form of authentication. It remains strong, it remains secure, and it remains automated, so users do not have to take on the burden of trying to figure out how to prove their identity in the account recovery. Next slide, if you would, please. And that goes to the user experience. As Michael mentioned previously, one of the biggest challenges to rolling out strong authentication is getting your users to buy in. It needs to be easy to use. Not only does it need to be easy to use, it needs to be easier to use than a password. I'm sure everybody here has a horror story about passwords where a user, even though they know that they should have a long, strong, and complex password, defaults to the simplest one with a single digit or two changed. With strong multi-factor authentication, it becomes much, much simpler, so they do not wish to bypass it. This begins with Microsoft Entra and their experience for logging in with a passkey. Plugging into a device, YubiKey into an endpoint, and typing in a PIN is the same regardless if you're on an Apple, a PC, my Windows PC, or another endpoint. What's more, moving from a machine, one endpoint to another, say you're moving desks or getting a laptop upgrade, or otherwise transitioning from one device to another, you can take your YubiKey with you and log into Microsoft Entra with the same user gesture, the same experience, and the same frictionless flow. It's streamlined. As I mentioned before, the user experience is plug in your device, type in your PIN, and touch the YubiKey, and you're in. There's no jumping through installing apps. There's no pulling out your phone to type in an OTP code. There's no trying to coordinate a push-pull notification to ensure that you're who you say you are. It's a great user experience, superior in many ways to everything that's come before. And that is only possible because Microsoft has put so much time and effort into making it that way, as well on their Entra platform, as well as Versasec, taking the entire issuance flow and automating it so users don't have to do anything other than plug their YubiKey in and tap a button. Next slide, if you would, please. But the best user experience is meaningless if you don't have strong security to back it up. And as mentioned previously, Yubico and phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication has led the way in making sure that the passkey solution meets or exceeds the security for every other MFA on the product out there at the moment. One of the key things is attestation. To ensure that your users are using a authenticator that is approved for your ecosystem, your organization, your enterprise, at registration, the Microsoft Entra can query the device to ensure that it is what it says it is. Is it a YubiKey? Is it a FIPS certified YubiKey? Is it issued through a secure endpoint? All that can be included and verified in the attestation certificate that is pulled at registration. Versasec makes your endpoint management simple by installing the Versasec solution on the devices that you are going to be using to issue credentials, such as your users' endpoints. You can limit the locations in which credentials can be loaded onto your device. You can manage the endpoints that are authorized to perform any sort of management issuance, reissuance of credentials, and ensure that only those devices under your organization's control are authorized to do so. But I'm saying a lot of things, and you can trust me at my word, or you can ask for verification. Thankfully, I can provide that. The NIST standard has established requirements through NIST, FIPS, to ensure that the security meets or exceeds what a phishing-resistant authenticator needs to be, not just in the authenticator itself, but the entire ecosystem. The Microsoft Entra solution, the YubiKey, and Versasec have all been able to get through the FIPS validation process, allowing it to be used at a governmental level. This is the same certification that is trusted outside of the government, such as large financials or healthcare, as they look to that as a strong signal that the devices and solutions as a whole meet or exceed the requirements for strong phishing-resistant authentication and resist attacks against user account information. And that leads us to the last one, the human element. Because there's so much time and effort put into making this a easier experience than a password. There's no need to rotate your passwords. There's no need to pull out your phone for an OTP. There's no need to install a huge PKI infrastructure if you had that. The human element means that this is the simpler solution to use, to maintain, and to keep secure. It makes it easy to use, and much more, it makes your users want to use it because it is quicker, it is easier, and it is more secure. Next slide, if you would, please. Which leads, of course, to the bottom line. One of the biggest things about the passkey solution with Microsoft Entra, Versasec, and Yubico is that the training is easy. You will save so much on training because to the user, it is simple. Plug your key in, touch the button when prompted, type in your PIN when prompted, and there you go. There's no need to go through complex password requirement trainings. There's no need to go through complex install your application on your mobile device. There's no need to jump through hoops in order to make sure you're following procedures correctly. It's simple, easy to use, and increases productivity, which goes to the cost itself. Since it does increase productivity, you will spend less time in your help desk trying to assist people with actually utilizing it. What's more, since it does protect against the vast majority of phishing attempts, you will be spending less time with users locked out of their accounts because their accounts have been compromised or they've tripped a solution, a feature that prevents password attacks or other trying to track attacks against device accounts. In our experience, when phishing-resistant passkeys are rolled out, help desk calls in regards to phished or blocked accounts drop dramatically, which again goes to the future proofing. Because you're taking a solution that is supported across the board and passkeys are quickly becoming the de facto standard to replace passwords, you're building a solution that doesn't just meet today's needs, but will be relevant for years to come. This is something that allows you to not just have your initial rollout, but have trust that going forward, you are going to be protected against needs changes for other regulations to form phishing resistant authentication. You are not going to need to worry about your accounts needing to move to yet another form of strong authentication. You won't need to have to plan for a rip and replace of the solution as a new one comes out. You're going to be complying with future regulations. You're going to be able to expand this to your entire ecosystem, and you're going to have strong flexibility to meet or exceed the solution thanks to the joint solution of Entra, Versasec, and Yubico. Next slide, if you would, please. So in conclusion, you'll be able to today meet any MFA mandate with passkeys via Yubico, Versasec, and Microsoft Entra. You'll not only meet them, but you'll be able to secure them into phishing-resistant users. That is to say, you will protect them from every stage of a user's account's lifecycle, from onboarding, daily use, recovery, to the end of life. Yubico, Versasec, and Entra are here to help you meet this challenge as you proceed down your own path to true multi-factor authentication that protects against phishing attacks. And with that, I've been talking a lot about Versasec. I'd like to hand it over to my colleague John to give you an insight into their solution and how easy it is to use.
Thank you, David and Michael. My name is John Hassan. I'm from Versasec, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about, as already known, some of the reality or challenges that many organizations face today. So as companies scale up their use of FIDO2 passkeys, for example, what could start as a smooth rollout can quickly grow complex. So potentially, especially if you're managing thousands of security keys across different departments, regions, maybe a mix of users, from office staff to frontline or remote workers. And so some questions can come up there, like how can you issue them securely, efficiently? What does that flow look like? How do we manage block devices or replacements? And then how do we track those changes across those teams? So these are everyday challenges. Again, not because the technology isn't strong here, it is, but because the operational layer around it needs some structure. And that's where I think we come in. And without that, it's, I think, easy to end up in fragmented processes, which you have potentially leads to inconsistent policies and maybe the credentials that fall out of that compliance. Next slide, please. So how do we bring order to this, what could be chaos? So we say complete device lifecycle management, from issuance to revocation. Every one of those actions should follow a secure defined process, whether it's onboarding a new hire, replacing a lost token, or revoking access for someone leaving. There should be no guesswork, no manual cleanups. It should be consistent, and those steps should be repeatable. And so ideally, we want a centralized management. All credential operations should ideally happen through that single interface. Should have some level of role-based access control. So each one of those operators or administrators only sees and does what they're allowed to do in that system. And so this gives you not just the control of the life cycle of the device, but it also means faster onboarding, fewer mistakes, and reliable enforcement. Again, no matter the region or the team that you're working with. And compliance to enterprise policies. So it isn't just about external regulations, it's about enforcing your own rules. So you decide who can issue, approve, revoke those tokens, and how each step happens. The CMS enforces those decisions, so you stay aligned with the internal governance, again, across those teams and different departments. And of course, every credential, every token, event, task should be, that's issued, reset, or revoked, should be logged. All right. You should have a full audit trail, making compliance checks simpler and giving you confidence in the integrity of your processes, those centralized processes. Next slide, please. So issuing a credential, of course, it's important. Issuing that token is, I think, just the beginning. What really also matters is everything that happens next. So if we take a real world example, if an employee joins the company, a FIDO2 token, a YubiKey is issued and tied to their Entra ID, clean and secure. But then things happen, right? Life happens. Maybe they lose their token. Maybe they block themselves out, switch roles, or leave the company. How do you stay in control? This is where the Versasec CMS lifecycle management comes in. Every credential has a defined state, right? So the initial issuance, of course, which is important, but then you have the active, inactive, locked, revoked, or retired. And these transitions are basically based on your policies. So you decide who's allowed to make these changes, and then each one of those steps is tracked. So we can also say it's not just for employees. This could apply for your guests, contractors, partners, or anyone else who needs that token issued to them. And no matter where or how credentials are used, the CMS keeps it aligned from the one single interface. So we're going management beyond issuance here. Next slide, please. When it comes to issuing passkeys, there's really no one size fits all. Different teams, different needs. And that's exactly why CMS supports multiple enrollment options here. And if we break these down, the option A, enroll at help desk. This is your in-person setup. The operator issues the credential and the user sets the PIN on the spot. So it's great for secure onboarding, maybe on day one when the new joinee comes in. Option B is the partial self-enrollment. The credential is issued ahead of time, maybe like in a welcome kit, and the user sets their PIN at a later time. It's great for remote or hybrid workers who can't be there in person. Then you have an automated option, that option C. This one is, you could say it's built for scale. In this case, the system issues the credential, could apply the policies, including that PIN if needed, and securely delivered in different means to the user. So here you have the minimal human interaction, but maximum control. Last but not least, you have self-service, complete self-enrollment. The user starts everything on their own. They plug in their YubiKey, set their PIN. They would first authenticate against an IDP potentially, and set their PIN and the credential registered with Entra ID in this case. It's not just for the IT folks, right? Tech savvy. This is great, really works well with frontline teams too. The interface is simple and intuitive. But no matter which method you choose, the CMS would handle the what we call the orchestration behind the scenes. Policies are applied automatically. The passkey is registered at the IDP. And of course, every step is logged for audit. So that's how you can support a hybrid workforce from factory floor to the executive office with a single platform. So next, I think we have the, if you could start that demo, please, Michael. So just to show you a demo on the enrollment methods, what we have here, the first demo is on behalf issuance of user enrollment to Entra ID. Here we have Matt Nielsen, and Matt Nielsen doesn't have an authenticator. User starts, the administrator, starts the admin application, and the device is prepared. Clicks issuance. The operator validates himself using strong hardware-based authentication, which is also logged in the system, so you can see who performed that function. And now the YubiKey is registered. The admin selects the user. In the back end, you have the Entra ID directory. Once the user is selected, the CMS continues with the process and starts the enrollment process of that YubiKey. Physical presence is required for the user to physically present a tapped key. So this enrollment model is based on the operator and the user being present together. User enters his private PIN on the PIN pad. And now we should see on the Entra ID side that the FIDO2 device is provisioned for the user. And you might already know on how the authentication process looks like here. And then discoverable credentials here. You didn't see anyone entering the username there, so very efficient. Of course, all that is audited. CMS processes are all audited in the CMS applications. This is what the flow looks like from a self-service side. User clicks issuance from the self-service application. He authenticates In this case, the example shows authentication against an IDP. And then the self-service proceeds with the issuance process. And at the end of this, same applies, you'll get that authenticator issued in the IDP, in the Entra ID. User sets his PIN to complete that issuance process. Okay, now we'll show you the revocation. So the admin or we call the operator accesses CMS, selects the user, goes to retired process, and it will centrally revoke the device to ensure that it's no longer active and cannot be used anymore. And we'll see that on Entra ID side once the revocation process is complete. And there we go. Okay. So if we go back one slide, David, if you don't mind, or sorry, Michael, back one slide before this, just before the demo. That's the one. Thank you. So let's talk about here where we where things really start to scale. So you've got users everywhere across countries, time zones, offices, or hybrid or working from home. And with the right setup, that's not a blocker anymore, as we showed you that you have different enrollment methods. So you can issue that FIDO token in one location and ship it anywhere without losing the control. The credential can be pre-issued, kept inactive until it reaches the user. Then with self-service, only that user can activate it securely from wherever they are. Again, the same model works for contracted vendors or external partners who need strong authentication, but aren't necessarily in your network day to day. And what ties it all together is that everything runs through that one platform. Issuance follows your operational process. Activation respects your security policies. Every one of those steps is traceable and auditable. And that's how large organizations roll out passkeys globally without turning IT into bottlenecks or giving up visibility. This is what we call centralized management, decentralized issuance. Next slide. I think we're on the last slide here. Yeah. There we go. So to kind of recap and finish up on what this setup actually enables, starting from left to right, we see the managing digital identities, the credential management. You have full control over the entire life cycle of those tokens, from issuance to revocation. The workflows are customizable. Roles define who can do what. Everything is secure, repeatable, and manageable at scale. Backend integrations, we have, of course, support for the Microsoft Entra ID and Active Directory. That means you can assign your YubiKeys directly to users from your existing identity platforms, whether they'd be cloud or on-prem or hybrid. If we talk about inventory management or stock management, not every YubiKey should be valid that you manage in CMS. So you would keep an allow list and track what's been issued. and make sure only authorized devices are used and managed across departments and regions. Audit and compliance. Every action, the issuance, updates, revocation, is logged again. That gives you the visibility and auditability for internal policy enforcement and your external compliance needs. Automation and APIs. So you can automate CMS tasks through our open APIs, like the issuance and revocation tests that you've seen, directly from your own apps through our open APIs. So we have that automation in place. Deployment options, you have cloud-hosted, private, or SaaS options available to you. On-premise, so CMS fits your infrastructure and security model. It's flexible there. So TMS also adapts to your operational flow, whether it's PIN delivery, approvals, self-service, it's all configurable. And just while we focused here on FIDO2, CMS also manages PKI, so we can handle certificate issuance for use cases like archive key recovery or digital signature use cases and integration with Microsoft CA on the same platform. So when you combine secure hardware-backed credentials from Yubico and the identity infrastructure from Microsoft and lifecycle management from Versasec, you're not just issuing these FIDO2 passkeys, you're building a scalable, secure, and policy-driven credential strategy ready for how your organization actually works today, but not just today and tomorrow as well. Thanks for your time. Back to you, Michael.
Cool. Thank you. So just to wrap us up here, I'm going to talk briefly about deployment if you are trying to deploy passwordless solutions using Microsoft Entra, and how we actually recommend going through a deployment project to try to help you get to that end-to-end state where you're using phishing-resistant passwordless methods across the board. So if you don't remember anything else from this section, I would highly recommend clicking that link or grabbing that link in the lower left-hand corner for aka.ms/passwordless guide. So this is a guide that we wrote that comes from Microsoft's own experience deploying passwordless and phishing resistance for our internal employee use cases, as well as along with some customers that we've worked with to help them. And so what we found is that there's a couple key steps in terms of the actual overall deployment project that you need to do beyond just some of the technical things that we've discussed. So at a very high level, there's kind of two initial steps that you need to take on the planning side. I work with a lot of customers to help them with their deployments, and one of the problems that I see is that customers very, very quickly want to get into the technical aspects of deploying phishing-resistant auth. Like they're really interested in, kicking the tires on using YubiKeys, Windows Hello for Business, passkeys on mobile devices, etc. And they don't take a second and step back and think about their use cases. Like, what users do I have that are frontline workers? What users do I have that are overseas? How do I want the registration user experience and the flows for these different users to work? What types of credentials am I going to use for different sets of users? So it's very important to take a step back and think through, as part of your planning process, what different types of user populations do I have, and which ones am I going to focus on? Establish kind of waves for yourself so that you are not just trying to tackle every single problem in your organization simultaneously, but instead you can work on low-hanging fruit or higher priority users. Like, for example, you may say, I looked at my environment and I have a lot of power users in this environment with access to very sensitive corporate resources. We're going to start with rolling out YubiKeys to these users, and then later I'm going to focus on my frontline workers who work in my retail store and getting them passkeys, and that might be a lower priority item. But those two different sets of users may have very different needs around how you actually drive them through an enrollment, what types of devices they use, what their overall user journey is going to look like. After that, you do need to look at device readiness. So devices play a huge role when we are talking about hardware-backed security. Like, are they on a Windows device? Are they on a Mac device? Are my frontline workers working on iPads or Android tablets? This is going to impact the different types of credentials that you use, the registration experiences that you may leverage. So you do need to think through what types of devices do I have and how do those intersect with the user personas. Then we recommend getting into the actual deployment. And this is where we have a lot of guidance around how do we actually get users to register. We recommend, again, doing this in kind of a phased approach, where you might start with sending end users comms saying, you know, these sorts of changes are coming. Here's some proactive steps that you can take. Maybe you're going to get your YubiKey and you're going to go register it proactively. Like, we're not going to force you to do it until, you know, some later date. But if you want to register it today, go ahead. And then as you get further along, you kind of need to start tightening things up and start to tell those users, hey, a deadline's coming. You must register by such and such date. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to access corporate resources anymore. And then once you have users going through those registrations, you need to take a very data-driven approach to understanding, are they actually using those credentials that you had them register? So once they register for something, you then need to turn around and look at your logs and what's going on in your environment and figure out, are they actually using that phishing resistant method? Or did I have a bunch of users register for their YubiKey because I told them they had to, and then they turned around and started using username and password again? Don't want that to happen, because ultimately we want to get to the enforcement phase. This phase, we have a lot of guidance again on this in the passwordless guide, and it can be challenging to turn off passwords entirely. This is a big organizational change that you're going through with your end users, because they may be used to using passwords in traditional MFA, stretching back years or decades. So because we're pushing them through these sorts of changes, we want to take, again, a data-driven approach to understand, do I have users who are already using phishing-resistant credentials? Okay, great. Let's start enforcing on them. They're kind of the low-hanging fruit. Do I have users who might have registered for something, but they're not using it? They may require more end-user comms or more end-user training. So you may want to take an approach where you look at the data, figure out what you need to do in the environment before you drop the hammer on the end users and potentially have some widespread business impact. And then finally, like we talked about earlier, attackers are not going to go away when we deploy phishing resistant auth. They are just going to move on to other types of attacks. So we want to think about, how do we need to evolve the way that we evaluate and respond to risk, and what types of risky events should we be looking for in our environment? Do we need to work with our SOC in order to get them looking for new types of detections, new types of activities that we think attackers may do, like attackers trying to register their own passkey on a user's account, or attackers trying to steal tokens after the user authenticates securely with their passkey. These are the types of things that we may need to start to evolve our risk and response programs to look for. And then finally, when we think about the user registration stuff, we do have some visuals here to try to help you think about some of the user journey pieces that Microsoft recommends trying to drive your users through. Ultimately, there's kind of 3 high-level steps, but you may need to tailor these depending on what you find during that user persona exercise, where you're defining different user journeys for different sets of users. But fundamentally, for every user, as you're rolling out this type of credential, we need to have some sort of strategy for onboarding and recovery. For a lot of customers using Microsoft Entra, this may begin with doing some sort of user verification. Maybe it's a help desk-driven process. Maybe you use something like Entra Verified ID. Maybe it's some other tool. And at the end of that, you give them a temporary access pass if they are going to be self-registering. Alternatively, if you're going to use a tool like Versasec to pre-register something like a YubiKey on behalf of a user, you may be able to skip past this step to some degree. Then in the next piece, what we really recommend is getting users something that we would term a portable phishing resistant credential. So this might be a passkey on a mobile device. It might be a YubiKey. It might be a smart card in some cases. But the value of something like a YubiKey or a smart card or a passkey on a mobile device is it's flexible. It can be used across different devices. Like, you can take that USB-C and NFC capable YubiKey and use it on your Mac, use it on your iPhone, use it on your Windows PC, use it on a kiosk device. It's a very flexible credential that you can use across different devices. Then, in addition to that, you may also want to use some device-bound credentials that don't roam, but can oftentimes enhance the end user experience. Like if you have users on Windows devices, you may also want to deploy Windows Hello for Business for them, where they're using something like a YubiKey for flexibility across many of their different devices. And then on their work managed Windows PC, maybe we also give them the option to use Windows Hello. So again, the meta point is, as you think through your user journey, think through what are the types of credentials we want these users to be using, and how do we want to structure the way that we have them register for those credentials? How do we want to onboard them? What is the user journey going to look like for each set of users that we have in our environment? Couple last things before we turn to Q&A. Just a couple tips and tricks from our experience working with customers. One of the things that we see a lot of customers doing is blocking end users from using more secure credentials, because oftentimes you don't feel ready as an IT staff to support those credentials. The time for this is past. If users want to be more secure, they want to use passkeys, they want to use YubiKeys, things like that, generally we would say, let them. Let your security-minded people help secure your environment first off. Like if they're volunteering to using something more secure, let's let them do it. But they can also be your early adopters, they can be your champions, they can help you figure out where some of the rough edges are as well. Also, don't plan on a rollout of phishing resistant auth to be something where you just flip a switch and say you're done. Certain components of a project may be something you can achieve fairly quickly, but to get to that point where you are enforcing phishing resistant authentication across the board in your environment will take time. So it's really important to think about things like defining milestones for yourself and accruing value along the way. You don't need to solve every single problem in your environment all in one fell swoop. So don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. Get started on deploying phishing resistant credentials. Start to mandate their use wherever you can. Yes, passwords may linger in a lot of environments for some period of time. That's okay. We can start to reduce our attack surface today. Don't get stuck in an analysis paralysis mindset where you say, I haven't solved 100% of my use cases, therefore I'm not going to get started. That is not the right approach in our experience. Couple additional resources for you. So again, the passwordless guide, I would highly recommend looking at. We have a bunch of videos on our YouTube channel that cover some of these concepts in more depth. And then we have deployment guides for things like going passwordless. So feel free to rely on these resources as you get started on this journey. And with that, let me open it up to questions and see if anyone has anything they want to ask.
So Michael, I can pull some out of the, go ahead. Pull them out of the Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to float some questions out, we can try to answer them.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions around use cases for frontline workers and first responders. So I can throw a couple of those out there. We've answered them in the chat as well. How do you handle frontline workers who walk up to PCs and log on to assist customers? USB access isn't easy or allowed.
So this can be challenging if you have fairly locked down devices. USB is not necessarily the only modality that something like a FIDO key can support, however. So we do recommend finding some modality that you can allow on those devices. If it's not USB, then NFC may be a good option. NFC is especially great because it doesn't require a lot of battery power or energy in general. We also have customers who will use things like passkeys on a mobile device, which does require Bluetooth if they're doing cross-device authentication, but you can be fairly locked down in what types of Bluetooth connections you allow. So ultimately, you will need to define a strategy that does allow something external to communicate with that Windows PC, but there are definitely strategies for being somewhat constrained about what you do allow and don't allow.
Thanks, Michael. One from Rocky. For Windows Hello for Business, what would be the best way to hide password login on the logon screen?
So a couple different options here. Excuse me. The best option that Microsoft would recommend is getting to Entra joined devices rather than hybrid joined devices. So I always recommend customers begin that journey because there are a lot of capabilities that we have on Entra join devices that are not on hybrid join. One of those is something called the Windows passwordless experience, where we will start to, if you turn that on your Entra join devices, we will start to de-emphasize the use of passwords in the OS in general, including we won't show the password credential provider on the lock screen anymore. That's kind of the best option that we would recommend. Alternatively, you can do things like enable the require smart card or Windows Hello for Business for interactive login setting on a Windows device. Now, this doesn't necessarily hide the password provider at the lock screen, but it does prevent the user from using it. So if they do click on the password provider and they use the password, Windows will inform them your administrator needs you to use Windows Hello for Business or a smart card, and then they'll have to go back and use one of those options. That's a good option for hybrid joined devices. It does work on Entra joined as well. So again, depending on your environment, you may have different options, but the overarching point is if you get to Entra joined devices, you do have more options than you have with the hybrid joined.
Awesome. There was also a question around law enforcement, and I know we had some answers from both Versasec and Yubico, but Michael, I'd love to see if there's anything you want to add to it. For law enforcement that has to follow CJIS policy, how do we force complexity rules for the PIN?
This is a good use case for using something like Versasec to manage the registration, because by default, I believe that there's not a way to mandate certain like PIN complexity or length on some FIDO keys, whereas if you're using a tool like Versasec to manage the enrollment of those keys, I believe you can enforce those types of policies. One of the other things that you can do that we've seen customers leverage is also making sure that you're buying FIDO keys that are FIPS compliant and use FIPS cryptography. I believe those have some more stringent PIN policies on them out of the box by default.
That is correct. The FIPS certified YubiKeys and the FIPS certification in progress YubiKeys have PIN complexity enforced by default, and it is enabled to turn it off.
Yep. So that's a great option for law enforcement, I think.
Awesome. So we've got about 2 minutes left, and I'd love to open it up for the three of you to either touch on any of the questions that you answered before, or if you have a closing thought, that would be great as well.
From my side, from the Microsoft side, I'm happy to see that we have this growing ecosystem around phishing resistant auth. It's really great to work on this with Yubico and Versasec. So if customers have questions on deploying this stuff, we are super motivated to help you get to phishing resistant authentication. So please don't hesitate to reach out to someone in Microsoft or your account team or Yubico or Versasec to get help on these topics. We'd love to assist you. David, anything you want to close with?
Absolutely, I couldn't say it better myself. Phishing resistance. Phishing is a growing issue. Now's the time to take steps against it. And we have a committed ecosystem to helping everyone achieve that.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you for joining. Again, this recording will be available on YouTube by the end of the week, and I did provide the link in the Q&A. It is available at https://aka.ms/Microsoft Entra videos. Thank you all for joining today.